Hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Using Competency Models to Hire Top Talent. My name is Luciano Gregoretti. I am a consultant here at Talent First, and I will be conducting today's session. The webinar will last for around 30 minutes. After an initial introduction, we will examine some of the main advantages, processes, and best practices around competency-based selection. We will then explore two assessment methods that will maximize your ability to predict future performance while minimizing recruiting costs. But before we begin with today's session, I would like to remind you that this webinar is part of a larger series called 7 Steps to Building Top-Performing Organizations Using Competency Models. We designed this program with the purpose of sharing part of our experience and best practices on creating integrated talent management processes that are based on competency models. There are two big reasons why we decided to design this webinar series. One can be called as a problem and one as an opportunity. The problem is that all too often companies spend a lot of time and a lot of money developing competency models, but then they don't use them to their best potential. On the other hand, there is a big opportunity of achieving greater business results by designing talent management systems that are aligned and integrated. In the first webinar of this series that you can watch on our YouTube page, we presented a unique approach to design valid and actionable competency models. In the second webinar, we focus on talent development, and today we will discuss around strategic selection based on competency models. The following graphic is an example of an integrated talent management strategy. In the center are the foundation components, job descriptions, and competency models. Job descriptions mainly describe areas of accountabilities and tasks. In other words, job descriptions tell what people need to do in a position. On the other hand, competency models are skills, knowledge, and abilities that are applied to achieve specific outcomes. In other words, competency models describe how people are expected to perform in order to be successful in their job and company. All supporting people's systems, whether they focus on selection, coaching, performance management, succession planning, should be built off the foundation elements for greater consistency and focus. All too often, we find that a lot of organizations do not have a truly integrated talent management system. The reason why we advocate the use of such integrated approach as the foundation of all people operations is due to the greater results that are implied. For example, a research conducted by Burson by Deloitte showed how companies that have integrated talent management systems are more productive, they are able to better retain their top talent, and their employees are more engaged. But let's start talking about selection. In general, why do companies invest in creating a structured and valid hiring process? Studies in industrial organizational psychology and in the organizational development fields demonstrated that designing a solid hiring process helps organizations select people that fit better with their culture and are also more productive. As a consequence, people are more motivated to stay in the company they are in and to do a good job, reducing as a consequence the costs related to absenteeism and low performance. Also, studies show that motivated employees are statistically more likely to be healthier, both physically and psychologically, and are able to be more resilient during high stressful situations. So these are just some of the reasons why it's a good practice to design a valid hiring process. On the other hand, overlooking selection can imply a large number of risks for your organization. I quoted only a few of the main consequences related to bad hiring. For example, replacing an employee can cost from 2 to 7 times his or her salary. That means that replacing somebody who earns $50,000, for example, can cost you up to $350,000. Other data say that negligent hiring cases have had verdicts costing up to $40 million as reported by HR.com, and 80% of employee turnover is due to bad hiring decisions. On top of all of this, there are many negative indirect implications of bad hiring decisions, including the effect on employee morale, the higher costs of training, and chances are that incompetent and unmotivated employees can have a very negative impact on your customers. One of the best ways to avoid those problems is making sure that the people have the right competencies to succeed in your organization, starting from developing a competency-based selection process. There are many advantages to competency-based selection. Here are 3 major ones that we feel are important to highlight today. A competency model provides you with valid, reliable, and business-relevant criteria to hire people in your organization. In fact, a competency model defines what success looks like in your organization by identifying those skills, knowledge, and abilities that drive to specific results described in concrete behavioral terms. This way, competency models allow you to focus your recruiting strategies and tactics on things that really matter for your company. By selecting those individuals that have the most important characteristic to succeed in your company, you can then maximize the chances of hiring top performers. A good selection process will enable you to uncover critical information about your applicants. Different methods enable you to uncover different levels of information. Those levels can be easily compared to an iceberg, like the one reported in this slide. The tip of the iceberg is the easiest to uncover. Usually candidates reveal those information almost spontaneously. The problem is that the predictivity of this level of information on future performance is basically zero. The second level corresponds to what people learn over time through life and professional experience. The ability to motivate a team, to create a compelling presentation, or to prepare a marketing strategy are examples of sets of behaviors that can be learned with life and professional experience. These traits can be uncovered with a series of specific questions, as we will see later in this webinar. The third and deeper level corresponds to the innate traits. Those can only be studied through scientific tools such as behavioral assessments. Therefore, it is important to go underneath the surface and assess both learned behaviors and innate attributes. So here is an example of the effectiveness of different assessment techniques and their combination. The graph on the slide was originally published by the Society of Human Resource Management. So we can see that traditional interviews, which typically have some structure and include a review of a resume, are about as effective as flipping a coin. When you conduct a behavioral event interview, and I will explain what this approach is shortly, the chances of a successful hiring go up to 65%. When you add a behavioral or competency-based assessment to a behavioral event interview, your chances of hiring a successful employee can go up to 85%. What we're talking about here is that hiring is just like a gamble. There is no silver bullet that will guarantee that you will hire the right person every single time. You can, however, hedge your bets by incorporating a competency-based approach with multiple tools, which will enable you to make a more informed decision. Before we get into some specific techniques and tools, let me show you a best practice approach to the selection process. This is a multi-stage, structured interview process whose single steps can be changed and modified according to the needs of your own organization. In Europe, for example, assessment centers are still used for hiring and could be placed as part of the process. However, most successful US-based Fortune 500 companies we have worked with have a similar approach that combines behavioral event interviews and behavioral assessments. In terms of ROI, this is probably the best option as it achieves similar results of an assessment center in terms of predicting future performance with much more limited costs. But besides the demonstrated effectiveness of this method and the relatively contained cost, it's surprising how it's still not very diffused. Most companies still rely on a subjective and structured interview process, where on one hand it is very easy for candidates to fake, and on the other hand the risk is to miss potential top performers because of the inability to identify them. To give you an example, I can think about a guy that I personally know who works in the food industry. He started working when he was very young for a food company and became a very successful sales representative at the age of 18. Now, due to a series of events, he decides to leave his company and gets an interview with a more established and successful one. So what this company did, their recruiters reviewed his resume and interviewed him with a very basic and subjective approach, deciding at the end not to invest in that person. Well, long story short, 2 years after, this young man has his own established millionaire business, and guess what? Became a competitor of the company that did not hire him at first. So if they use a competency-based approach in the selection process, they would have realized, for example, his incredible business acumen, his keen product knowledge, and his great ability to manage rejection in the sales process. But no, they base their judgment on first impressions and other irrelevant factors, losing as a consequence millions of dollars. So the first method I would like to present to you is the behavioral event interview. When properly applied, this powerful tool can uncover adaptive behaviors that cannot be discovered with a simple, unstructured interview. As we said before, behavioral event interviews can help the interviewer understand some of the most important skills an individual needs to possess in order to succeed in a specific role within a specific business and in a specific organizational culture. So let's see how the behavioral event interview works. It starts with a valid competency model that identifies skills, knowledge, and abilities that drive success in a role. Competency models basically provide the frame to focus the interview. They tell which one are those behaviors you need to look for in a candidate. The questions you ask are based on those frameworks and help you identify if the person demonstrated consistently and effectively those behaviors in the past. And when somebody has shown consistently specific behaviors obtaining relevant results, then he or she would be likely to perform those behaviors again in the future, making your hiring decision successful. Now, here are some of the main advantages of using the behavioral event interview in the hiring process. First of all, it provides answers to questions based on what they actually have done rather than what they might imagine they would do in a hypothetical situation. Behavioral interviews, when properly conducted, provide in-depth information about the applicant's behavior, motivations, processes, and results because the interviewer has the opportunity to ask follow-up questions to gain a much clearer understanding of how the candidate handles real-life work situation. Behavioral interviews also promote equal opportunity since they reduce the likelihood of bias related to superficial and personal characteristics. Candidates are evaluated on what they have actually done rather than on biased information such as how they look like or how personable they are. And it is difficult for a candidate to fake a good answer in a behavioral interview because they must provide details in response to probing questions. And remember that answers about real-life examples can also be verified with reference checks. Finally, as mentioned earlier in this presentation, the quality of the candidate assessment is equivalent to that gain through an assessment center process, but at far less cost. So the foundation of behavioral event interviewing is the STAR model. You want the applicant to provide complete, detailed responses to the questions asked. There are many courses available on how to conduct a good behavioral event interview. If you decide to design a competency-based selection system, make sure you train properly your interviewers. What we usually do with your clients, we train key individuals in the organization, usually recruiting or HR managers, which then will train managers internally. This is a very cost-effective train-the-trainer kind of approach that we strongly recommend for any organization. Now, we're going to see how to create behavioral questions based on a competency model. Here is a simple example of competency with a definition and the success factors. For optimizing the space in the slide, we left out the definition of each of the success factors, but please keep in mind that a valid competency model would also include the specific behaviors that are correlated to significant business outcomes. So let's see an example of how a competency can be translated into specific questions. Let's see the first question. Describe a time when you were able to identify an obstacle hinder an individual progress. What steps did you take to enable your direct report to achieve their goal? What results did they achieve? So this question aims at assessing the coaching skills of an interviewer. Now, the goal of your behavioral event interview questions is to have a clear understanding of the situation, the task, the actions taken by the individual, and the results they were able to achieve in order to evaluate presence, consistency, and effectiveness of desired behaviors. You have to keep in mind that not all interviewees are familiar with this type of methodology. One of the main abilities of the interviewer is to ask other specific questions that can uncover important details that will help make a final good evaluation. The second selection approach we're going to talk about today is the behavioral assessment. If we look again at the iceberg slide, we see that behavioral assessments provide information around the deeper area of the model. Those are the hardest behaviors to uncover because they're strictly related to an individual's stable personality traits. While behavioral event interviews tell us information about behaviors that are learned and can be modifiable with proper training and significant experience, behavioral assessments are able to go one level deeper and tell us the natural behavioral and motivational tendencies of an individual. And those tendencies are quite stable and difficult to modify over time, even if people can learn behaviors and tricks to compensate. Using selection, they can provide insights around natural talents and what we call watch-out areas. So there are many types of assessments out there. Some are good, some are bad. Some of them are appropriate for selection purposes, and some are not. For example, most of you are probably familiar with the Myers-Briggs. Well, this assessment tool can be used for developmental purposes, but it's not a legal hiring tool. In general, these are the main features of a behavioral assessment. Usually it's built on a series of standardized questions used to measure an individual's personality characteristics. As we said before, they measure innate attributes and preferences versus learned. And they also provide quantitative and objective measures. So as we said previously, behavioral assessment together with behavioral event interviews can be 85% accurate in predicting behaviors in a future role. So far, we do not see an equally effective alternative at similar costs. So here is an example of a behavioral assessment, the Behavioral Insight, which is Talent First's proprietary assessment tool. The Behavioral Insight is a valid online personality assessment that measures 14 core personality traits that are important in the business world. The Behavioral Insight only takes 25 to 30 minutes to complete and can be seamlessly integrated into existing talent management systems. Providing detailed information about natural working preferences and motivators used by managers as a powerful managerial tool. It can also be used for coaching and development, for example. I am personally using it for my self-development to compensate some of my natural watch-outs, but it was also very useful for me to become more aware of my natural talent and motivators that I can leverage both for enjoying more what I do every day, but also for achieving better results. The Behavioral Insight can be used to develop what we call the high-performance footprints for any position or family of positions. It provides a model of traits that statistically differentiate between top performers and other people. Finally, very important, the Behavioral Insight meets the EEO and OFCCP guidelines for selection, so it can be used legally in your hiring process. Here is an example of individual results. Starting from the bottom, we have the single traits measured by the assessment. From left to right, we have persuasive motivation, learning style, empathy, assertiveness, willingness to confront, stamina, pace urgency, resiliency, sociability, service motivation, caution, follow-through, sensitivity to rules, and structure, which are the 14 traits measured by the Behavioral Insight. The traits that are in green, like, for example, persuasive motivation, are more critical for the role than the ones that are colored in gray. And the dots are the scores of the individual. The blue bar is what we call the high-performance footprint, which corresponds basically to the average of the scores of high performance in a specific position, plus and minus one standard deviation. You can see that the black dots are aligned with the high performance footprint, while the red dots are outside of the model. These red dots are the areas that you will want to investigate on a deeper level during an interview. So the first step is to administer the behavioral insight in your existing workforce. Then we correlate the results to the performance data. And after that, we identify traits that distinguish top performers. And then we use such models for selection and other talent management purposes. You typically need a population no less than 30 or 40 people to conduct a study and to create a high-performance footprint. And even so, population of 60 or more are preferable. For smaller population, Talent First can provide industry high-performance footprints for specific roles and verticals. One thing needs to be said in regard to the performance data, and the type of performance data that can be included really depends upon the position. For example, they could be sales numbers, they could be performance reviews, they could be competency ratings, or they could be also customer evaluations. So this is a section of a behavioral insight report that analyzes the fit of the candidate with the traits that are critical for the role. And it also provides low and high trait description statement and a dashboard method depicting the overall fit, which will facilitate the interpretation. The results of the behavioral insight can be used for targeting questions in an interview setting. Now, you can create your own questions, or you can use the questions that are automatically generated by the systems that were originally created by industrial and organizational psychologists and continuously updated by our team in order to optimize efficiency and effectiveness of your interview process. Now, if you're like me, you would probably like to try the tool personally. So in order to thank all of you to participate into this webinar, we decided to give you a free bonus to take the behavioral insight and also to receive a feedback by an expert consultant. You will receive a link for the registration in the thank you email that I will send you within the next 48 hours. Then you will have about 14 days to complete the assessment. And after you complete it, I will schedule a feedback session with a Talent First consultant. So we thought this was a nice opportunity for you to learn about a great assessment tool and to learn about yourself. So here we are at the end of today's presentation. But before we close, I would like to remind you that the next webinar of the series, Competency Models and Performance Management, will be live on July 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern Time and on July 24th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. If you haven't registered yet, you will find the links in your registration email or visiting our website, www.talentfirst.com. So thank you for being with us today, and I hope to see you on board for the next webinars.